Now, Claudius is very hands-on and very interested in governing, and he's very good at administration. So he's really the first person interested in kind of the nuts and bolts of administration and foreign policy. The first person that was really that interested since Augustus, that Tiberius and Gaius Caligula didn't do much at all. And of course, one of the things that we see is under Claudius, we're going to have a great period of Roman expansion. That Tiberius added nothing new to the empire, Caligula added nothing new. Now remember, after Teutoburg-Florus, Augustus warned, no new territory, we have enough, don't expand. But Claudius is going to find lots of opportunities to expand. And in particular, the area that he will look to is Britannia. And possibly he plotted this out early in order to give a little bit more prestige to, his reign, because the tradition was, well, now we have a fool as an emperor. Well, he's going to do something to show that he has military credentials. And so as it happens, an allied king in Britain is expelled. It's by the Catalavani tribe. And this will give Claudius the casus belli. It'll give him an opportunity to proclaim war. And so what he does is he has his general Aulus Plautius lead 4 legions will be sent up to the coast of Gaul. Now, Claudius is aware of all this, and actually the plan is that Claudius is going to fight to the Thames River. And then Claudius, once they get there, will come over and he'll have the war elephants, and we'll give them an opportunity to become a imperator, a warrior. And so this is the plan. Now, as it turns out, once Claudius gets to the English Channel, probably at Boulogne, Caligula had the abortive invasion of England, which didn't happen for many different reasons, but it kind of became this farcical depiction in which the soldiers, depending on how you read the source, either collected seashells from the English Channel or possibly, and more likely, Celtic canoes, but these were all brought back to Rome. So Caligula had thought about invading Britain. Claudius is actually going to do it. So probably leaving from Boulogne, we have 4 legions that come across. Well, here's one of the problems. We're relying completely on Cassius Dio, and there's no real details. We know a little bit more about this archaeologically, but let's think about Britain for a second. Remember, 90 years earlier, Julius Caesar had been there. He invaded in 55. He invaded in 54. Now, it's likely that there was a Roman presence in England as late as Augustus, but it hadn't been on the radar screen for a while. So on some level, Claudius is channeling the spirit of Julius Caesar. And so throughout most of his reign, he looks to Augustus for inspiration, but here it's Caesar. And so Claudius crosses the channel with his 4 legions and 3 divisions. We don't know where they landed, and this is a source of a lot of historical debate. There's Kent, which is probably the place. There's Sussex as one possibility, the Isle of Wight, and we don't know if they all came across together, if they landed in different locations, but they came across. And Claudius meets the Catalavani, and the king had died, and so his 2 sons are Craticus and Tugodomnus. And so Claudius will lead the Roman forces against them, and there'll be 2 major battles in which Tugodomnus dies, and so Craticus will remain kind of the head of the anti-Roman party. But the Romans will push to the Thames, and that's when Claudius gets the invitation. Now, Claudius was outside of Rome for a 6-month period. This gave him an opportunity to go to the Danube, inspect fortifications, go up along the Rhine, and then cross. And of course, because of all the conspiracies, he had to take a lot of senators with him, all right, so they don't cause trouble at home. So he crosses over into Britain, and there's one final battle with the war elephants. Claudius is in Britain for a total of 16 days. But the final victory, Craticus is defeated and he flees, and then Camalodunum is captured, and that will become Colchester. That will be the Roman capital at this time. And in fact, a temple for Claudius is dedicated. So Claudius is worshipped as a deity by the Britons. Now Craticus will run away, and it's a little while before he's captured. But now Claudius is able to go back to Rome and have a great triumph. And Britain has become a province, and this is something that Julius Caesar couldn't do. Right, so he one-upped Julius Caesar, as it were. So there's a great triumph for Claudius. Now, of course, only southeastern Britain was a province. There was still a lot of work to do. So Claudius is going to advance further. Vespasian, the later emperor, actually is one of Claudian's generals, and he'll be active. But of course, Britain is always going to be a a tough area for the Romans. Under Nero, there's the Boudiccan revolt, in which things were so bad that Nero, for a while, considered just simply leaving Britain altogether and forgetting about it as a province. And then under Domitian, the general Agricola, Tacitus' father-in-law, does so well. He fights in Caledonia. It looks like he may have conquered the entire island, but of course Domitian has him recalled because he's jealous and suspicious. Nevertheless, Britain does become a province, and although the Roman sphere of influence, will expand, it will remain a province really until 410, until the Romans have to abandon it. So about a 350-year period is a province. That's not the only area where Claudius expanded the empire. He also dealt with a lot of kind of cleaning up house. So there were client kings, and there was a big problem in Mauritania in Africa because there was a client king there, and Caligula had summoned him to Rome. And for whatever reason, once he got to Rome, Caligula killed him. So Mauritania had broken out in revolt. Claudius is able to put down that revolt and absorb Mauritania as a province, and that's probably when he was first addressed as imperator, or military commander, military leader. And he was addressed as such 27 times throughout his life. But Mauritania, probably. The client king of Thrace dies, and then rather than pick another of the client kings, Claudius simply absorbed it. So Thrace, the area between Achaia, Greece, and then Asia Minor, is absorbed as a province. On the Danube, Noricum is absorbed. It had been part of the state since Augustus's day, but just kind of cleaning up matters, it's fully absorbed and becomes a province. In Asia Minor, Lycia becomes a province as well. It had been a kind of federation of 12 cities, but now it's brought in as a complete Roman province. And then also Judea, that Herod Agrippa will be the governor, but he dies, and it'll briefly revert back to Claudius until Claudius tries to figure out what to do with it. He will eventually give the province to one of Agrippa's sons. But he enlarges the Roman Empire. So he's the first emperor since Augustus to enlarge it, and it won't be increased as much until we get to the reign of Trajan. So in terms of expansion, this is a very vital period. Claudius is also very interested in judicial and legislative affairs. He's very, very hands-on, and he takes his imperial duties very seriously. He treats the Senate with respect, and he tries to get along with it. He addresses it very well. He involves himself in it all the time. But as we've seen, there's always a lot of tension, and there's all these coups. So, he treats it with respect, but there's all these coups. One thing he does, probably because of all these attempted coups, is he revives the title of censor. And this censorship hadn't been used since the reign of Augustus, so about 60 years. But what the censor does is it examines the moral life of the senators, and they need to meet a certain economic threshold in order to be. And so what Claudius does is this, actually he'll have a co-censor, who's Vitellius, who will be the father of the later Emperor Vitellius. But what they do is they examine the senators, and those who drop below the minimum threshold, we're told, what Claudius does is he notifies them privately, so that gives them an opportunity to resign. So he won't embarrass them. Hey, wait, you! So we'll give an opportunity to actually resign and kind of save face. And so once these senators resign, he's able to put kind of his men or people with whom he's comfortable in the senators. And, it's extremely likely that because of all these attempted coups, Claudius is forced to kind of rearrange the personnel of the Senate. He is very interested in justice. He sits on court cases himself, and even Suetonius concedes that he's very conscientious. He hears court cases on his birthday, on holidays, and that he is very interested in justice. And we have all kinds of examples. The reviews are kind of mixed, but again, the reviews all reflect a senatorial perspective. And for a lot of people, especially the senators, wait a second, we hear cases too. It kind of seems like Claudius is getting in their turf. So there are all of these ways in which, Claudius is able to upset the senators without even maybe not realizing that he was doing so. So he hears the cases himself, and the senators see this as an infringement on their own prerogative. As part of his concern for law, he bans loans made to minors at an interest rate that were payable upon their father's death. And so this is one way to stop abusing minors by, allowing them to take out loans and interest. And it's another way to protect fathers because, it would be easy to kill dad and say, hey, I want my money. He also has some concern for slaves. If a sick slave has been abandoned, what Claudius rules is that if the slave recovers, the slave has his freedom. So abandoned sick slaves will become free. That is, they need to recover. Now, remember, Claudius is familiar to being amongst freed people. And so what he does is he creates a cabinet. And his cabinet almost entirely consists of freedmen, which of course is going to anger the Senate even more, because the individual senators feel like they're being left out. And instead, these social inferiors, are being put in place. But he has a cabinet which includes Narcissus, who is in charge of his letters. Actually, just one interesting story. Before Claudius's fleet left Boulogne, before the fleet left Boulogne for the invasion of Britain, there was a brief mutiny, and Narcissus was there for it. And Narcissus, the freedman in charge of Claudius's letters, he gives a speech, and he encourages soldiers, no, let's not mutiny, let's sail to Britain, and we'll conquer it, and we'll all become rich. And what happened is simply the fact that you've got a freedman addressing all these soldiers who are getting ready to mutiny. The fact itself was so comical, it made all the soldiers think about Saturnalia, and that's the holiday where everything's turned upside down. So you've got an ex-slave addressing all of these soldiers, and they began to laugh so hard that they forgot about the mutiny. And so Narcissus was able to end the mutiny. But back in Rome, he's in charge of letters. The freedman Paulus is in charge of the treasury, and Callistus is the secretary of justice. But again, this angers the senators because they themselves don't feel like they're a part of governing, that he's taking these freedmen, he's giving them positions of power, and they're people who are social inferiors. So again, the senators aren't wild about that. Claudius, however, was very interested in reform and infrastructure, and so he embarks on many, many public works throughout his reign, as opposed to Tiberius and Caligula, who weren't really interested in such matters. But what he does is he has 2 aqueducts coming into Rome constructed. And to be fair to Caligula, he actually did start one, but Claudius finishes it. And they're completed in 52. And they meet at the Porta Maggiore. So we have 2 major aqueducts bringing fresh water to Rome. And he also restores a third one, Aqua Verdo. He is very interested in transportation. And so roads, road infrastructure. And we're told in Gaul and Hispania, he has roads built everywhere. But even in Italy, he has a new road built that will pass through the Brenner Pass in the Alps, and the goal is for it to link Germania and Italy. So literally a road that goes to the Danube, and it's the Via Augusta Claudia. Yeah, okay. So he also builds aqueducts in Cyprus, we're told, and throughout Asia Minor. So he's got this big building policy for his entire empire. But back in Rome, he's very concerned about grain distributions and the fact that they get to Rome in a timely manner. And in fact, we're told that there was a period where there wasn't enough grain. There was a grain riot, and people in Rome threw grain crusts at Claudius, and he had to sneak in the palace through a side door. Now, something similar happened to Augustus as well. It tells us that Rome was extremely dependent on annual grain supplies coming in from the provinces of Africa and Egypt. Now, what Claudius realized is, well, Rome needed a better port. And so what he'll do is at the mouth of the Tiber, he'll begin to create Ostia, which will become the major Roman port, and then, granaries where they can drop off grain. So first, the port of Ostia. So Claudius is very hands-on. He'll go there and examine the work being done, the construction of the port. But also, he wants to make sure that grain gets to Rome year-round. And so he encourages sailors to sail from Egypt to Rome, even during the winter when it's a little bit dangerous to sail, and he'll grant them benefits. So he wants to make sure that there's year-round, or there's grain coming to Rome, even throughout the winter months. And he will give sailors perks if they will do this. They will get the Roman right, or maybe even Roman citizenship. Okay, so there are all of these different perks that these sailors can get if they do all of these things. He is involved in the secular games. While Claudius is emperor, it's the 800th anniversary of the founding of Rome. We'll have the big secular games. He has parts of the Circus Maximus rebuilt in marble for this, and he has parts of Pompey's theater rebuilt as well. The only real sad infrastructure story concerns the draining of the Fucine Lake, because Claudius wanted to create more arable land in Italy, right? So more grain produced in Italy. And the Fucine Lake was this area which was, was a big marsh. There was malaria, so there were problems. And so Claudius came up with a plan of draining the lake, so we can increase the grain yield in Italy rather. And so he comes up with a plan, and so there's a tunnel dug underneath it, which is going to drain out the lake. And there's a big public ceremony where we have gladiators, and we have Claudius, and we have important Roman people all gathered to watch games and have a good time. And that's when the lake is emptied. And what happens is it's exactly at that moment where the water begins to swirl down, and as it turns out, the tunnel was a little bit too crooked, and so the water comes down and then comes back up, and Claudius, gladiators, and all the assembled people have to run for their lives because there's water coming everywhere. So he's not able to drain the Fucine Lake, but to be fair to Claudius, the Fucine Lake was only drained in the 19th century after a Swiss engineer came up with a plan to do so. So these are some of the things that he did. One issue I wanted to mention, well, actually two, I guess. First, concerning the Senate. Now, he tries as hard as he can to treat it well, but, there's a lot of senators who are simply positioning themselves as the new princeps, so he has to deal with all these attempted coups. One way that Claudius addresses these problems within the Senate is by creating new senators who are not from Italy. And guess what? This is going to cause even more conflict with the Senate, because there are many in the Senate who think the Senate should be an Italian-only body. And so many of the people that he recruits as new senators are provincials, especially from Gaul, because many in Gaul, now these wealthy provincials, they're invited to Rome, they meet the financial prerequisites, and so they're invited in. And so Seneca, for example, making fun of or mocking Claudius, tells us, oh, he wants to make every Greek and Spaniard and Gaul and Briton a senator. Well, that's not true, but he brings in a lot of provincials. And there was a lot of hostility to this. I mean, many of the senators said, no, we're Italian-only body. And Claudius gives what I think is a great speech, and it shows the influence of Livy. And he says, look, my ancestors were Sabine, right? We were invited in under Romulus. He said, later we did the same with the Latins. He said, the strength of Rome is its ability to bring people in. That is, as we expand, we bring in people, and they are represented. He also says that is one of the failures of both Sparta and Athens, that while both of them were great military powers, the reluctance to create new citizens or to bring anyone new on board is one of the reasons that they failed. Okay, Rome expands, it brings in new people. And so, he gives a speech. I imagine a lot of the Italian-only senators weren't wild about it, but that was now, it was becoming more normal. If you remember, Julius Caesar made Gaul senators, and that horrified everyone. That was 90 years ago, but 90 years had passed. And so the idea of provincials, entering this august body probably had become, I guess, maybe more tolerable at this juncture. Now, another thing, too, is that Caradicus, back in Britain, is finally captured. And so he runs to a friendly queen, and he thinks he's going to be able to hide from the Romans, but instead she hands him over. And so he's shipped back to Rome. So typical Roman thing, like Jugurtha or Vercingetorix, you'd expect him to be sent to the Mamertine prison and die in prison. But instead, he does something interesting when Caradicus gets to Rome. Well, first, he does homage to both Claudius and to his wife at that time, Agrippina the Younger, which was, kind of a shock. But in Britain, there were female rulers, so he was more used to that. But it shocked a lot of Romans. Then he gives this speech about, I was fighting for my men and my land and my horses, and if you were in my position, you would have done the same thing. So please show clemency. And, the Romans hear this, and Claudius grants him clemency. So rather than dying in prison, he lives out his life on a small farm in Italy in peace. The other thing that Caradicus says is, he looks around Rome and he sees all these magnificent buildings. And he says, you come to Britain and you want our tents? Why? And so, but Claudius is able to show his clemency by allowing Caradicus to live out his life, the remainder of his life in peace. And of course, his whole family had been captured, so he's there with his family. Nevertheless, senators don't like him, and there's multiple coup attempts. We've already seen Scribonianus. Most of these coup attempts are radiating from the Senate, not all. And actually, his third wife, as we'll see, will be involved in some of these coup attempts herself. Suetonius tells us that he has 35 senators and 300 knights killed. So, that's not going to establish better relations with the Senate by killing some member of their number. So these conspiracies couldn't have done anything to improve relations between the Senate and the emperor. Now, one area which we can agree Claudius did have lots of mishaps and mistakes are with his women and his marriages. Because he marries 4 times, all right? But even before he's married, he is betrothed twice. And the first attempt is broken off for political reasons. The second attempt is broken off because the bride dies on her wedding day. So, not a good start. So the first marriage is probably something arranged by Livia, because his wife will be Plautia, Organelilla, and she was the granddaughter of one of the aides of Livia. So, Livia probably said, hey, look, Claudius needs a wife, and hey, do you have anyone available? And so her granddaughter. Now, so Organelilla will give birth to a son, Claudius Drusus, so Claudius will have an heir, but unfortunately, when he's just about in his teens, he is asphyxiated, so he dies. And then, as it turns out, that Claudius is going to divorce Organelilla for adultery, because the rumor is that she's sleeping around. And in fact, he divorces her, and then she gives birth to a baby girl, Claudia. And Claudius repudiated her and said, that is not my child. The rumor was that Organelilla was sleeping around with the freedmen in the palace. So, of course, Claudius didn't want to have anything to do with that. Wife number 2, Aelia Paetina. I've already alluded to her because that is the adoptive sister of Sejanus, the Praetorian prefect under Tiberius. And so Claudius, probably Sejanus came up to him and said, hey, I have a sister. You want to get married again? And so what could Claudius do? Okay, sure, yeah. They had a daughter, Claudia Antonina. But when Sejanus met his downfall, it was like this big whirlpool, everybody's getting sucked down. That's when Claudius divorced her and said, no, I don't want to get involved with this. Wife number 3, probably arranged by Caligula, because the woman, Valeria Messalina, was part of Caligula's circle, and that should bring up lots of images. But anyway, so part of Caligula's circle, and so Claudius agrees to marry her, probably 38, or early into 39. And actually, it helped Claudius too, because his wife is now, a friend of Caligula. So although Caligula treats him horribly, maybe he won't kill him, right? So, another political marriage. But as it turns out, it's a very strange marriage, because Messalina will give him an heir, the son Britannicus, and then another daughter, Claudia Octavia. But it becomes pretty clear that she's not very interested in Claudius. Rather, she's just interested in everybody else. And it's not clear exactly what's going on, but it seems that she's trying to establish different power centers, but she does this largely through sex. And everybody knows it except Claudius. And so he's a cuckold, because Messalina is sleeping around. And it's not just senators, the actors, slaves. So she's very promiscuous. All the ancient sources agree. In fact, Tacitus relates a story in which she gets into a contest with a well-known prostitute over how many men they can service within a 24-hour period. And she wins. So Messalina, he's getting around town, and everybody in Rome knows except for Claudius, and nobody wants to tell him. And this, again, upsets the senators, because Claudius is censor, and he's examining the moral life of the senators when he's got a wife who's sleeping around with everybody in Rome. And so this is a problem, and it becomes more of a problem after Claudius brings back a lot of exiles. For example, Agrippina the Younger, Caligula's sister, was brought back from exile. And she's got a son, Lucius Domitius, and Barbus. I'm going to call him Nero, okay, because it's a little bit easier. But she's got a son, Nero. And so they come back into Rome. And at the opening of the secular games, celebrating the 800th birthday of the founding of Rome, Messalina comes out with Britannicus, and yay, people cheer. But Agrippina comes out with Nero, and people go wild, because everyone had sympathy with Agrippina. She's the daughter of Germanicus that had such a horrible fate, the daughter of Agrippina the Elder, who was exiled and killed. And so the crowd goes wild, and Messalina starts to worry about her position. And what can she do to strengthen it? And it's hard to establish exactly what she was thinking. We don't know. But it seems that she thought she could use her influence and these centers of power that she thought she had created to get Claudius expelled or killed or exiled or something. And what she does, and a really crazy maneuver, is, she's been having an affair with the consul designate, Gaius Silius, and this has been going on for a while. And even in a fit of passion, she forced Silius to divorce his wife, which he did. And then Silius says, okay, now you divorce your husband, but the problem is the husband's the emperor. And so what Messalina did is instead she married Silius, and before getting a divorce. And it wasn't a private marriage or something done secretly, it was done publicly. It was done at the palace. There's food and drink and guests, and hundreds of people saw it. And so at this point, the freedmen say, this has gone too far. We have to tell Claudius something. And what they do, because everyone's afraid, they don't think Claudius will believe them. Claudius's mistresses, Calpurnia and Cleopatra, and so they send his mistresses out. Claudius at this point is in Ostia, so he's out of town supervising, the harbor and the grain warehouses. And so Calpurnia and Cleopatra tell him, he's like, really? He doesn't want to believe him, but he says, better get back to Rome as quickly as possible. And of course, he's confused. He's not sure if he's still emperor. Has he been deposed? What's going on? And so the retinue leaves Ostia and begins to come back to Rome. And at this point, Gaius Silius goes to the forum. Messalina quickly realizes, what she's done and how awful it is. I don't know why she'd understand this in the first place, but she realizes she needs to meet Claudius because Claudius is madly in love with her and will forgive her. And so she grabs the kids and she runs down to try to meet him at Ostia. And Narcissus, the freedman, says, get away. And then he relates all of her crimes. Get out of here. And so they establish a perimeter around the caravan coming back from Ostia to keep Messalina away because they know that Claudius is going to forgive her, right? And so what the retinue does is when it enters Rome, rather than go directly to the palace, it goes to the house of Gaius Silius. And Narcissus says, I want to show you something. And the minute Claudius walks in the front door, guess what? The whole house is full of Claudian paraphernalia, that Messalina had been busy taking furniture and heirlooms and things out of the palace and installing them at Gaius Silius' house. And so Claudius looked around and then he knew everything's true. This is all true. So he's brought back to the palace and he has dinner and he drinks and we're told he's thinking about forgiving Messalina when the freedmen say no. And they take a signet ring, they have a seal that she's got to be executed. And so, orders are sent. We're told that she's unable to commit suicide, so she's killed. So Messalina's out of the picture. Now, all the freedmen decide Claudius needs a wife, and they all differ on which one. They all have a favorite candidate. And it's actually Paulus who suggests Agrippina the Younger, who was Caligula's sister and Claudius's niece. So, Uncle Claudius to Agrippina. Well, Claudius thought about this, and the sources tell us that she uses her feminine wiles, to get in a position of power. But this is incest. This is scandalous. And so it's discussed before the Senate. And again, another speech is made. Well, these types of marriages may not be common for us, but for other people, say in Egypt, these are, common marriages. So the rule forbidding intermarriage between an uncle and a niece is rescinded, and Claudius marries Agrippina. And at this point, he loses a lot of favor with the people because there was kind of a yuck factor, in there. So I don't know how long that lasted, but Agrippina was very, very ambitious. And in fact, she's proclaimed Augusta, the first person to be proclaimed Augusta while living. So she's very, very ambitious. She's the most powerful woman in Rome since Livia. Okay, and so she's really in a position of power. She's granted all of these rights. She's allowed the right to use a carpendum, which was a special carriage that priests used. She also, Claudius founds a new colony, Agrippiensium. It's modern-day Cologne, but it's the first Roman colony named after a female, and it's named after Agrippina the Younger. And of course, in a Roman world, the only way that a woman can really achieve power is through her son. And Agrippina begins to put pressure on Claudius to adopt Nero. And eventually what happens is in 50, Nero is adopted and then is betrothed to Claudius's daughter. So this is the arrangement. Nero is about 3 years older than Britannicus. And so Claudius's plan was probably that Nero and Britannicus would inherit together and, so they would succeed. But what starts to happen is later in his reign, Claudius begins to lament the fact that he, adopted Nero and maybe that he even married Agrippina because he sees how ambitious the woman is. She wants power and she wants power for her son. And so he begins to drift back towards Britannicus. And then, of course, Narcissus had never favored Agrippina in the first place. And Agrippina blamed the whole failure at the Fucine Lake on Narcissus. It was all his fault. So what Agrippina's thinking is how do I remove Narcissus? And she realizes that as Claudius's opinion begins to change, she needs to do something quickly. Nero had just reached the age of manhood. Britannicus was still a minor, and so she had to do something at this juncture. And you've probably heard all the stories that, of course, Agrippina probably bribed the official taster for Claudius and had his favorite dish of mushrooms poisoned, and so he eats some mushrooms. So these are some of the traditions. The other is that he regurgitated the poison mushrooms, and then he had to be poisoned with a poisoned feather that was placed down his throat. But Claudius is nevertheless killed. This is kept secret for a little bit until Agrippina appears with Nero, and here's our next princeps. And of course, people probably started thinking, well, what about Britannicus? But of course, Britannicus wasn't of age. And so he's going to be, left in the shadows for a while until at some point Agrippina, after Claudius's death, will find it convenient to team up with him. And that's when Nero will dispose of Britannicus. Okay, but Nero in 54 becomes emperor. So Agrippina has fulfilled her ambition. She has her son placed as the new princeps. And so at the expense of Claudius. And so now Uncle Claudius is no more in 54. Well, let's think about Claudius for a second, because, well, what did he do? Well, he did a lot, especially in comparison to Tiberius and Gaius Caligula. So in terms of the expansion of the empire, I've already indicated that this is the greatest expansion that we've seen since Augustus, and it's the greatest expansion that we'll see really until Trajan. Okay, so we have a great enlarged Roman Empire, which means Britain had mines. So Britain was wealthy, had mines, and had people too. So additional resources for the empire. When we think about his position as, well, his interest in law, in justice, and fairness, that a lot of Romans that, had heard that he was a buffoon, they saw how concerned he was for law and that he, heard the cases himself. This obviously made them think differently about Claudius. His concern about infrastructure. Well, the empire was in a pretty good place with all the roads and the aqueducts. So we have a major building period under Claudius, something which we hadn't seen under Tiberius nor under Gaius. So we have all these improvements within the Roman Empire, the new provinces, the improved infrastructure, the concern with law. So what happens is Agrippina has Claudius deified. And so there's a new cult of Claudius, and of course Nero is going to be a priest. Well, he loses interest in that pretty quickly. And so Claudius is kind of forgotten. He doesn't even complete the temple for Claudius in Rome. Now, after Nero, we get the four emperors. The Flavians are interested in Claudius. So Vespasian and Titus and Britannicus grew up together. They were their childhood friends. So they were interested in Claudius, and they actually completed the temple. So whatever reputation Claudius had was improved under the Flavians. So the temple of Rome was completed, and Claudius was worshipped as a god. We know at least into the 3rd century. So for a while. But it seems after the Flavians that the reputation and the position of Claudius deteriorated. And so we have Tacitus and Suetonius, depicting him as a fool and a pawn. And this really is the view that we get into the 20th century. And it's been, and especially the latter half of the 20th century, when historians look at exactly what Claudius did, is, in terms of an emperor, he was actually a good emperor. And of the Julio-Claudians, he's not Augustus, right? But you've got Augustus, and then you've got Claudius, and then, you have Tiberius, Gaius, and Nero, whatever order you want to put them in. Probably Tiberius, Nero, Gaius, Nero. Well, so that's what you have there. So a long-ruled emperor, so he reigns from 41 to 54. And so despite all the coup attempts, it nevertheless is a very long period of stability in Roman history. And so often, when we think back to Uncle Claudius and we think of his reign, as being, a period in which Rome was ruled by a fool, actually the reality is that he was a very hands-on, good administrator. And so with respect to Claudius's reign, I think, and we need to give him a thumbs up. They did a great job.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today to explore the life and reign of a personal favorite of mine when it comes to the Roman emperors, and that is Emperor Claudius. Comment your thoughts below in the comment section, and also check out the links in the video description below that'll take you to more work by Dr. Traver himself. Dr. Traver, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
And thank you for having me.